Welcome to the Living in Alignment podcast. My name is Amy Landry. Through a collage of conversations, here we distill mindful living and timeless wisdom within a modern, everyday context. Thank you for being here. Born in Texas in 1953, Dr. Robert Svoboda is the first Westerner ever to graduate from a college of Ayurveda and be licensed to practice Ayurveda in India. After being ritually initiated into the Pokot tribe of northern Kenya as its first white member in June 1973, he moved to India, where he lived during the 70s and 80s, receiving his Bachelor of Ayurvedic Medicine and Surgery from the University of Poona in 1980. In his final year of study at the Tilak Ayurved Mahavidyalaya, he won all but one of the University of Poona's awards for academic excellence in Ayurveda, including the Narayan Sharma Gold Medal. During and after his formal Ayurvedic training, he was tutored in Ayurveda, yoga, Jyotish, Tantra, and other forms of classical Indian lore by his mentor, the Aghori Vimalananda. Author of over a dozen books, Dr. Svoboda has travelled extensively in the years since 1986, spending 3 months per year on average in India. You can find out more about his work and study online with Robert at drsvoboda.com, and also stay up to date with him on Facebook, YouTube, and Instagram. Dr. Robert Svoboda, it is a true honour to have you as a guest on the podcast, and given your current travels and schedule across India right now, I'm even more grateful that you've, as I said before we press record, you've carved some space out to join me in this conversation. So thank you and welcome.
Thank you.
As I alluded to in our email conversation, normally we begin these conversations on the podcast with the story behind each guest. And you've had and continue to live a remarkable life. Your story, your timeline is vast. And I appreciate that if we were to share your path thus far, we would need a very large window of time. Hence, I thought we could begin with hearing perhaps a couple of your most pivotal moments or experiences across the past few decades, if you would be open to sharing.
Pivotal moments, probably the number one moment to begin with was when I when I left the US in March of 1973, I was still 19, and I decided I had been accepted into medical school in the US, but I wanted to visit some place exotic. So I went to Africa. I crossed Africa overland. I joined an African tribe. I did all kinds of unusual things. And then I flew to England, then I crossed overland to Nepal, and then and then I just happened to, in January of 1974, meet the right people and get admitted into the Ayurvedic College in Pune. And then in September of 1975, another pivotal moment was when I met my mentor, Vimalananda, in Pune, in the context of I was interviewing practitioners of various medical systems, Ayurveda in particular. And so that was a very pivotal moment. His death on December 12th, 1983, so that will be 40 years next month, was another pivotal moment. And thereafter, I think probably everything has moved along fairly consistently. Maybe the most pivotal moment, just from the perspective of life and death, was September the 19th of 2021, when his foster daughter, Roshni, who I had known well for almost 50 years, when she uh, passed on, and she was the fifth person that I personally have cremated in my lifetime. So I think anytime that you personally cremate someone, that's a noteworthy thing. The first two were with my mentor, and they were his father and his paternal uncle. But then the third was him. The fourth was the original mentor that I had before I met him, who lived in Hyderabad, but happened to arrive in Bombay and die the day after I arrived myself in Bombay. And so I was the person, despite the fact he had 2 or 3 sons himself, I was the person who ended up cremating him. And then I cremated Roshni. So every time that death is, of course, a very, it's a great transition. And when you're actually taking your hand and applying fire to someone's body and having that transform that body from the present into the past, that's a pivotal moment for me, at least.
I can only imagine. And given that you've experienced that so many times, I can sense that perhaps obviously there's some similar experiences, but each would present its own different just qualities, obviously in terms of your relationship with that person too. But I obviously we've discussed in the lead up to this call together our focus today around death, and some may feel that's quite a morbid subject to have a conversation around, and no doubt that is due to our Western conditioning around the subject. However, given you have a wealth of insight, particularly through the lens of Indian culture and systems and philosophies, perhaps a useful foundation for this time together, maybe to begin with the Sanskrit language and specifically those words that have the potential to illuminate a useful perspective for us on death, such as sharira or deha or mrityu, etc. So would you like to share a little bit about that to lay some foundation for us?
Yes, I mean, I certainly there are many words in Sanskrit that mean the body. Yes, and deha is one of them, which comes from a root that means to plaster. And so basically the body is plastered over the frame. In fact, in Ayurveda, we use a different word for plastering, lepana, to indicate the job that the muscles do. But this concept of there being a number of different layers that are applied to an individual so that they can function in the world is one that is reflected in that word. Sharira is another fine word. There are different opinions as to how exactly the word sharira is derived, but it, as far as I'm concerned, is derived from what I was taught in the Ayurvedic college. Shiryate iti sharira. The body is that which deteriorates. And so that is the nature of the body. Okay, it is, let's say, up until age 35, you stop growing, depending on who you are, let's say sometime between 21 and 25, but you're continuing to make new connections. You're continuing to refine your ability to function effectively, and your bones are continuing to gain density up until you're 35. But after 35, you really do start to deteriorate. And this is why we don't see or when we do see, we see one out of a 1,000 professional sport people who are still at the highest level of activity after age 40. But we don't see anyone who's at that level after age 50. And so this is because the body is simply no longer, someone put it, I think, very well, that after age 40, nature loses her interest in you. Because everyone has his or her or their agenda. And nature's agenda is that there should be there should be continuity of species so that evolution can continue. And that can happen only if there is reproduction. So once you get to a certain age and you're not reproductively fit anymore, then nature is not so interested in you. In fact, humans are one of the very few, probably less than 10 species we know of, including the orca and I think a species of aphid, that continue to live on after the age of reproduction ends. And in the case of humans, it's obviously the case because we are so hypersocial that it's essential to have elders to assist us to keep the culture in one piece and to keep transmitting it from one generation to the next. So it is, while you hit your apex at age 35, maybe you have, let's say, a 5-year, grace period, but definitely by age 40, your eyes start to go, lots of other things start to happen. And you have the choice of either plummeting or slowly and gradually declining. And gradually declining is certainly the way that Ayurveda suggests is the better choice. But decline you will, and that's what that word sharira reflects. And then, of course, there's the word mrityu, and it comes from a root that means to die, mru, but it's very closely related to another root, the root mrd, and that root, mrd, means earth. So fundamentally, dying means going back to the earth. And in Sanskrit, Sanskrit is a samskarika bhasha. It's samaskrita. And so there's a certain preference for speaking in a refined kind of way. So instead of saying he died, or he kicked the bucket, or he bought the farm, or whatever, one way to say that she died is you can say panchatvam gataha. She returned to 5-ness. Those 5 things being earth, water, fire, air, and space. The 5 mahabhutas, the 5 elements that make up the world. But the main thing you return to is to the earth element. That's the main thing that is keeping you functional on this planet. And therefore, the ashes to ashes and dust to dust kind of concept.
There's a sense with all these Sanskrit words, an undertone of indicating to us, though, that we are not this body, right? Not to detach from, because everything is just going to disintegrate and dissolve eventually. Would that be correct in your eyes?
Well, I certainly think that it from the earliest times, people have not tried to pretend that they may have desired to be immortal, but they have not tried to pretend that death does not exist. I mean, in the West, and I shouldn't say the West, in the affluent world, you can often get away without seeing death, but very occasionally and accidentally. All of the food, you never see a slaughterhouse. You don't ever, I mean, in India you do, but let's say in more in fancier areas, you don't see slaughterhouses. You don't see you will only see a corpse if it is laid out in the funeral home, and then very briefly, and it's already been gussied up, so it looks all tidy. And there is, and people actively try to avoid exposing themselves to death because everyone is afraid of dying. There is no question about that. There is no organism that wants fundamentally to die. Every organism wants to continue living as long as possible. But it's important to remember that when you were born, it is absolutely certain, unless you happen to be like a mythical figure, a legendary figure like Prahlad or Parashuram or Hanuman, and you become immortal, that's a different matter. But even immortals are not immortal forever. Even the immortals, they may live for hundreds, maybe they live for thousands of years, but no one is going to remain. The stars live for sometimes billions of years, but they also eventually fall to pieces. So everything that is created is going to be destroyed. There's no question about that. And it's good to acknowledge that and not be afraid of it and live your life like if you were to die right now, you would not have any major regrets. Because it's very important, not only for yourself, but for we hope you have loved ones. And if you do, then you owe it to them to as far as possible, make a very an exit that reflects that you have achieved a certain quality of peace. Otherwise, you're going to be leaving them agitated, possibly for years or decades, because you have not performed that service for them. So it's not just for you that you should be well composed before you die. It's for everyone you're leaving behind.
I do recall in your class on death and consciousness in the Satsanga subscription, you're speaking so practically. You share such a wealth of knowledge in all these incredible fields, let's say, of the wisdom systems or traditions of India. But I remember you also being extremely practical, getting your life in order and having your will in order, and not just thinking about yourself, but yes, thinking about the people around you and understanding what you might be transferring onto them.
And of course, I was partially thinking about this for myself because Roshni, Vimalananda's foster daughter, despite the fact that she was otherwise very well organized and had been planning for several years to finally sign her will, failed to do so before she had a stroke, and then not only had a stroke but could not move any part of her body sufficient to be able to do any signing thereafter, and couldn't talk and couldn't. So it was a direct and very because I've had been having to deal with the repercussions of that. So it was a very direct reminder, and I had to compare, I had to compare this unfavorably with my own parents, who Roshni knew well. And my parents, they prepaid their funerals. They had their wills made out far in advance, and everything was very smooth. And it made it easy for me and my sister to get everything taken care of, and it made it and they had already indicated what was not in the will, what needed to go to whom, and it just that when someone has just passed on, this is the kind of thing that really means something, because no matter who you are, and even if you don't really get along with your parents or your siblings or whatever, you are going to feel it when they die. And you're going to feel it because you share some of their genetic material, and the prana, the life force, has just been disconnected forcibly from that genetic material. So you're going to feel it at not even a cellular level. You're going to feel it at a genetic level. And it's going to be very uneasy for you. And that's why they say in India, there's a period called Sutaka. It goes on for 2 weeks after a birth and 2 weeks after a death. And that's the time that there's the transition of a soul, of a spirit, between this world and the next world. And that's the time when things are very much, they need to be, it's a good time to have routines and rituals and things in place that assist your prana to stay nice and balanced at a time when you yourself are quite out of balance.
Mm-hmm. And I guess that's where the practices and principles of yoga and Ayurveda are incredibly useful in facing those real confronting, again, pivotal moments of our life, to bring that steadiness. And I think forever, for the rest of my life, I'm going to hear you in the back of my mind saying, remain calm, over and over, because returning back to that over and over is such simple but potent guidance.
Remaining calm is extremely valuable, especially in a crisis. If you're going to freak out, please do it sometime other than during the crisis. You can freak out in advance if you know the crisis is on the way. That's probably the best idea. Otherwise, wait till the crisis is over and then fall apart, not during the crisis.
Speaking of crisis, that's a good segue here. So there is a tremendous amount of death being witnessed and broadcast across the world right now. And perhaps in reality, this is really, we have to admit, going on almost all the time in various countries around the globe, but may not be being shown to us, or we may not be choosing to pay attention to that. However, on some level, death is certainly, I'm not sure if revered is the right word, but for lack of a better word, revered within India, which you've sort of alluded to here. And hence, I'd love for you to share more about this with respect to the auspicious city of Benares or Varanasi and the confronting smashans or cremation grounds on the banks of the Ganges River. I know personally, being there myself for the first time, I think it was 11 years ago now, it was profoundly a very moving experience. I think one that's quite unfathomable to the minds of, let's say, most Western people to a degree. So would you mind sharing some insight into Benares, particularly within this context of death?
Well, yes, I think, of course, every city in India has one or more smashan, a smashan meaning a cremation ground, though originally that word apparently was ashmashan, which means a place where there's lots of rocks. So that could have meant that originally people were being buried or exposed to vultures or wild animals or whatever. But there are places where nowadays people are being cremated. And of course, the 5 cremations that I've done, I did in Bombay, one in the Worli Smashan, but the other 4 in the Banaganga Smashan. And the Banaganga Smashan is a very beautiful and small and tidy smashan in the one of the most exclusive areas of the city. And I'm fond of it, of course, because I've been there so many times, not only to cremate those people, but also to attend other cremations, but also because it's right on the sea. And well, there is a wall between, because of the monsoon, but you can open a door in that wall and walk out directly, and just, 50 meters away, you are right at the ocean. The ashes can go directly into the sea. And that's one of the wonderful things about Benares. Most smashans, whenever possible, are built on a river, so the ash will be able to go directly into the river. But Benares is, of course, on the Ganga, and the Ganga is, for many people in India, the holiest river in the country. And Benares is a city that has been associated with death. Nobody knows exactly how long, but certainly thousands of years. And so it's associated with other things as well. It's associated with learning, especially of the arts and of Sanskrit, etc. And it's associated with Lord Buddha and many saints of Kabir and Vallabhacharya and Tailang Swami, etc. But death is really what it has been associated with for a long time, because of a belief that if you die there, there is the possibility that Shiva will personally release you from the need of being born again. Many people believe that everyone who dies in Benares will not be born again. Other people feel that that is not the case. I suppose one would have to ask Shiva in order to know. But it's definitely true that Benares is probably the only city. It's the only city I can remember being, seeing this in. But every day, at least a dozen, and sometimes many more corpses are brought in by truck or by train, and they are carried down to the water to be cremated in Benares. So even people who don't die in Benares want to be cremated in Benares because of this concept that they will be blessed by that. So in that way, Benares is very much, and has been for thousands of years, it's been associated with not just death, but the possibility of a death that can have a transformative effect on someone who otherwise might continue to transmigrate. And there are two smashans within the city of Benares. Benares is, there's several different names for Benares, and there are different ways of defining what is Benares. So there's the Pancha Kroshi Yatra or Parikrama, and Pancha Krosha means roughly 10 miles. So that's a circumambulation, or it's not a total circumambulation because the river comes in between, but going around the entire city. And everything within that is regarded as being more or less Benares. But there's a much smaller area, and that's the area between the Asi River and the Varana River. That's the area called Varanasi. And that is also called Avimukta. And Avimukta means the place that Shiva never abandons. So that's regarded as really being the central, most important part of Benares. And in Avimukta, there are two smashans. The smaller one is called Harishchandra Ghat. It's named for a king, Harishchandra, who fell on bad times and who had to serve as an employee of the cremation, the crematory, the cremation officials, this is again hundreds of thousands of years ago. And the bigger smashan technically is called Jalshayi Ghat, which means sleeping on the water, but everyone knows it as Manikarnika because of a small pond that is located very near to it. And Manikarnika is noteworthy because since thousands of years, there has always been at least one corpse burning there day and night, 24 hours a day and 24 hours a night. And one thing that is particularly noteworthy about the smashans, at least in Benares, is that if you want to burn someone at Manikarnika, you can't just go in there and buy some wood and light the fire yourself. You have to purchase the fire from a man called the Dome Raja. And the Dome caste are the people who are in charge of doing the cremations. And as you can imagine, they are not very well thought of in society, except when it comes time to cremate someone. And then if the Dome Raja doesn't like your face, he will just say, go away. You can't cremate your body here. I won't let you. So even the lowest member of society at a certain moment becomes the most important person in society. And that's another very useful thing that Benares teaches people. The original Shankaracharya came to Benares. And he lived about, more than 1,300 years ago. And when he came to Benares, he had a very high opinion of himself and of his purity, etc. And he was bathing in the Ganga, and a chandal, which is more equivalent to a dome, a chandal splashed some water on him. And Shankaracharya said, "Whoa, Chandal, don't splash water on me. I am Shankaracharya." And the Chandal said, if the Ganga is supposed to be purifying everything, then how is it possible that that any water I should be splashing on you is impure? And then Shankaracharya understood that his ego needed to be restrained. And it turned out that Chandal was Shiva himself. So that's another thing to know, that in Benares, and especially in the Smashan, you never can tell when you're going to come across Shiva or Bhairava, which is Shiva in his really terrifying form. And so it is always a good idea to remain very calm and to be alert to what's going on around you, because Benares is a very intense place. And it's a place that you don't want to visit. You don't want to visit it just out of curiosity. You don't want to visit it randomly. You don't want to visit it without due forethought. And I would advise anyone, in fact, I always advise everyone who goes to Benares to first go to Kala Bhairava, because Kala Bhairava is a form of Shiva, but he's the form of Shiva who is he's the sheriff, the chief of police of Benares. And you go to Kala Bhairava and you say, Kala Bhairava, I have come to Benares. Please let me stay here in safety and achieve the purpose that I've come here for. I have not come here randomly. I have not come here frivolously. I have come here with a specific purpose. Please assist me to achieve this purpose. And then there is at least a chance that you will be able to experience Benares without having some serious problem. Because serious problems can and definitely do occur. And sometimes for no fault of your own.
It's a place that I found very intense for the senses.
Yes, it's intense in every possible way. I mean, India is intense, but possibly Benares is the intensest place in India in a positive sense. I mean, there are certainly more intense places, but not in a positive sense.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And of course, one of the unique things about Benares is that despite the fact that corpses are being cremated every day on the river, despite the fact that you see corpses coming through the gullies every day, many people still fail to acknowledge the reality that they themselves could die at any time. So even in a place like Benares, where you're exposed to death all the time, that does not necessarily mean that it's going to cause you to acknowledge that reality in a meaningful way in your own life. So, and of course, as my mentor Vimalananda used to say, if you go to the smashan and you sit there for a few days, let's say for 2 weeks, and you watch people be burned every day, and if you do not, at the end of those 2 weeks, if you have not recognized that this is going to happen to you also, then you should just give up trying to be spiritual for this lifetime and go do whatever you want to, because it's not going to happen for you. If you can watch everything that happens in the smashan happen for 2 weeks and not be transformed in to some degree, at least to the degree of acknowledging your own mortality, then we can be sure that no other kind of spiritual practice is going to transform you.
Mm-hmm. I get a lot of people reaching out to me actually quite often about just guidance on traveling to India, and I do find that it's one of those places that a lot of people throw on the list on their very first visit to India, and yeah, it's almost like an initiation in some sense, visiting there, because you really get thrown into the heart of the beauty and the chaos and the mysticism of India in many ways. At least that's how it feels for me, certainly.
Yes, I generally discourage people from going to Benares on their first trip to India,
Mm-hmm.
because it's if you are overwhelmed, you're not going to be paying attention to things that you need to pay attention to. And there are all kinds of things that you may need to pay attention to, but if you're just going to be overwhelmed, you're better off starting off by being overwhelmed somewhere else until you get used to being in India, and then consider going to Benares. So yes, I mean, if you were going to be in India for 2 months, at least wait for the first go do something less confrontational for the first month, and then consider paying a visit to Benares.
Wise advice. So I'd love to shift the direction of the conversation and move into Jyotish, or Vedic astrology, into that lens, to bring some light for the listener onto the planet Saturn, or Shani, and its relevance in this conversation to death. And maybe if it feels appropriate, in addition, maybe 1 or 2 remedies that are useful to us that we can all engage in, no matter our astrological birth chart.
The Jyotish recognizes 9 grahas, And of course, the word graha is sometimes translated as planet. But of those 9, 2 are luminaries, the sun and the moon, 5 are actual planets, and 2 are points in space where eclipses take place, the North Node and the South Node, Rahu and Ketu. So the word graha is a better term to employ, because graha in Sanskrit means to grasp, to grip, to grope. And so what happens is when a particular graha is strongly influencing you, that graha grabs hold of your awareness and causes you to see the world in a particular way, causes you to see the world according to the archetype that it embodies. And in the case of Saturn, Saturn is the furthest out of the 5 visible planets. And it is the slowest moving. In fact, the word shani means slow. And because it is far away, and because it is slow, it has the reputation, and it is a well-deserved reputation, of representing everything that is inexorable, everything that is happening relentlessly, step by step, that you can't evade. And of course, this includes old age, and includes falling ill occasionally. It includes experiencing the deaths of loved ones. And eventually, it includes experiencing your own death. All these things are going to happen to you. And you may not want them to happen, but they are going to happen anyway. So that's it's an important part of Saturn's influence on someone, to force them to have these experiences that they did not want really to have. And by extension, because of having all these experiences, Saturn rules disillusionment and sometimes even depression, and it rules isolation and a sense of fate influencing one strongly. So Saturn is a planet that is best addressed by being disciplined, because that's what Saturn is very disciplined. As soon as you are born, he knows exactly when it's going to be time for you to die. So that sort of planning and step-by-step, slow forward movement is what Saturn's portfolio among the 9 grahas, and it's a useful attitude to have when one is trying to address the influence of Saturn on one's life. So being disciplined in general. Saturn means responsibility also. So focusing less on how I'm going to enjoy myself and focusing more on what and whom am I responsible for in this world, and making sure that I am paying attention to my responsibilities and I am discharging my responsibilities appropriately and meaningfully. This will make Saturn happy, because you're doing what he normally wants you to do. And of course, he also, by virtue of the things he takes away from us, he rules privation and loss and a sense of general lack. And this is why the most useful things to do for Saturn are to refrain from doing things. So on Saturdays, for example, you could refrain from eating. And maybe it's not convenient, or maybe it physiologically is difficult for you to live only on air on Saturdays, but maybe you could live only on water, or maybe you could live only on juice or soup or milk or khichdi or one thing. Or maybe you could skip a meal. Whatever kind of privation you impose on yourself, Saturn will appreciate. Another good thing to do on a Saturday, and you can do it any day, but Saturday is better because that's Saturn's day. Another good thing to do on Saturdays is to fast from talking. So just observe silence all day long. Or if you can't do that, do it half the day. Limit yourself in one way, or maybe observe silence and don't go out on that day. Do not meet other people. Sit at home, do extra yoga, meditate some more, recite some extra mantras. Saturn also represents service. So any kind of selfless service that you perform at any time, but especially on Saturday, will be appreciated. And that includes especially to Saturnian type of people. And Saturnian types of people are the ones who are isolated from the rest of society. So these could be people in hospitals, in jails, in sanatoria, in mental institutions, in monasteries, homeless people, any kind of people who are not fitting into society. These are Saturnian kind of people, and serving them in some way will benefit your relationship to Saturn. So and of course there are mantras you can repeat, and you can make offerings of oil in temples and things like that. But it's even more meaningful when you do something to limit yourself personally, because that's what Saturn is trying to do to you. I will say that it is very, very valuable to feed crows on Saturdays. Now, crows, of course, crows don't live everywhere. And I think there's not actually that many crows possibly in Australia. But I have noticed that there are grackles in Australia, at least in Byronshire, there are grackles. And grackles are also they are dark birds, and they are similar to crows, and they can also be fed. If you want to feed a crow or a grackle or a seagull, which is more for Rahu, but can also be extended to Saturn in a way, or any other kind of corvid, like even a blue jay, make it a point not to feed it right at your home, because otherwise these are all very intelligent birds, and soon you will find them flocking to your house all the time, expecting to be fed.
Can I ask you, just to clarify, you've highlighted obviously that abstaining is the approach here, but also, if I'm correct, I believe also just getting your life in order is also part of, pleasing Saturn. Is that correct? So, it could be an example of making sure you have a will, for example, or tidying up your house, or decluttering, or, just getting your life into a more orderly state. Is that correct?
That's where the discipline aspect of Saturn comes in. Yes,
Okay.
you should be disciplined. Yes, you should. The simpler your life is, the more that Saturn will appreciate it, because Saturn is not showy and complicated like Venus is, for example, or the moon is. And Saturn means responsibility. So yes, having your affairs in order. Yes, if you owe money to people, paying them back. Yes, if you have said you're going to do something, then you need to be in a position to do it. So being responsible is very much what Saturn is most interested in. And that's why it's so essential for people to be clearly aware of what their responsibilities are, and to commit themselves to addressing and dealing with those responsibilities.
In case it's helpful to the listener, something that I do most Saturdays, I have two very young children, so silence is just not an option in this season of my life. But something that I do on Saturdays normally is to abstain completely from screens and social media and watching anything. And I feel like that's also just minimizing that communication or that sort of talking or engaging. And yes, I've got to engage with my family and my children, and we have duties and obligations usually on Saturdays. And as I said, that's the season of life. But I've found that removing myself from social media and engaging with my community and stepping away from that has been, for that one day, has been very helpful on many levels. So that's something that perhaps could be of value.
That would definitely be of value, and that's something people should be doing anyway, because social media and screens are so addictive. So it is something that everyone should be doing. It's something that, and Saturday is an excellent day for that. So, and even again, even if you can only do it for half of the day, then that's better than nothing. Setting aside a certain period of time that you are deliberately doing, you're deliberately imposing some kind of limitation on yourself. That's what Saturn is looking for. That's what he will appreciate.
Wonderful. Robert, may I ask you, and this is something I do ask all guests, and it's partly because it's something that I just personally find very fascinating, but I know it's of value to the listeners. And I'm sure there's so many things you could respond with, but maybe it's a big question, maybe not. What maybe one or two book recommendations would you have for anyone immersed in any of the, traditions of India, whether that's yoga, Ayurveda, Jyotish, and beyond, Vastu, etc.?
I would say, the first book that comes to mind is a book called K-A, by Roberto Calasso.
I have it.
And it's not set out like a conventional book. It's a good way of just sort of getting getting closer to what might be an originally Indian perspective on the Indian mythology. I honestly have not looked at it in several years, but I remember very much appreciating a book called The Wonder That Was India by A.L. Basham, B-A-S-H-A-M, who was a professor at ANU, in fact, and whom I met once in like 1980 when he was rather older. And it just, provides sort of an overview of all the different things that India created and offered to the world and so on. I'm not sure exactly how easy it is to find anymore. Ka certainly is easy to locate. But otherwise, as far as, I'm not sure that the ultimate volume has been written that really takes an overview of all the different vidyas and puts them into a perspective that is that that provides context to how they have influenced the culture for so many thousands of years.
Mm-hmm. We'll pop these in the show notes too for anybody listening in, just to make it easily accessible. I know certainly that your books have been really influential on my path. Prakriti being the first one that I read many years ago, and I've loaned to many friends, and I know that a huge number of people listening no doubt would have read the book and would own the book. And of course the Aghori series. I'm curious to know, are there any more books in the works at all from you?
Well, as a matter of fact, I have just means a couple of weeks ago, completed the translation of a book that is almost 7,000 verses long, and that book is called the Navnat Bhakti Sara, and the Navnat Bhakti Sara is about the 9 knots, Goraknath, Machendranath, etc. And it is was written a couple of hundred years ago, and it is meant to be used as an upaya. Upaya means a remedy, like my book, The Greatness of Saturn, is a remedy for people who are undergoing their 7.5-year transit of Saturn over their moon. So this particular book is when you have different problems in your life. There are 40 chapters that you identify what problem it is, and then you create a ritual for reading that chapter or reading it silently or aloud, or having someone else read it to you if you can't read it, every day, making offerings, focusing your attention very diligently, and having that reading again act as a remedy. So I finished the translation. Now I have to put it into my own words instead of the translated words, and add an introduction, which will be fairly extensive. And so hopefully before too much longer, that will appear.
Mm-hmm. That sounds wonderful. It sounds really incredible. And I'm curious also, are you intending to release the audio books to Aghori 2 and 3? And if so, do you know approximately when that will be coming?
I don't have any immediate intention of doing that, because it's a lot of work. The first one, I think, took 27 hours, and I mean 27 talking hours, not counting the hours that I was not talking and having to rest or eat or sleep or whatever. So that was several days, and that was a big investment, both in time and also in energy.
Mm-hmm.
And so maybe at some point when I run out of other things to do, but I can't envision that happening very soon.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. That's very reasonable. I'd love to ask you, as we come to conclude our conversation, just a couple of fun little questions here, if you don't mind. Robert, what is your favorite meal?
I have been asked that question more than once, and unfortunately,
Sure.
I don't really have a favorite meal. I suppose it would probably be Alfonso Mango's Ghee and Milk. That's what comes for me at the moment.
Nice. And if you could read only one book or text for the rest of your life, nothing else, you can read it as many times as you like, what would that be?
That would be the Jnaneshwari, which is technically called the Bhavarta Deepika. And that's the commentary, that's the Bhagavad Gita with the commentary of Jnaneshwar Maharaj, who lived about almost 800 years ago in near Poona. And it's just, number one, of course, it's a brilliant commentary. He was a Siddha. He had achieved a personal transformation of a very high degree. And so, and he gives hints as to how to do that with yourself in the book. But in addition, the entire commentary is offered to his guru. His guru was his brother, Nivrittinath. And there's just, and Jnaneshwar finished this commentary about the time that he was 20 years old, because he took living samadhi, Jivan samadhi, when he was 21. So there's a freshness, and there's just a quality of devotion to his brother, who was, after all, his brother as well as his guru, that just is infused through the entire work, that that itself provides a certain quality of transcendence.
Mm-hmm. You did recommend that book at some stage in the satsanga, and I managed to, seemed very difficult to get here in Australia. So if anyone listening, I managed to get a very high quality secondhand copy from the Thrift Books website. I'm yet to read it, but I am thankful to have that. And so last question for you, what would be your favorite temple in India?
Well, that is a really good question also, because I've been to many of them. Mm-hmm. And I would have to say that probably there is, I'm not sure I could say there is one temple. My favorite, as far as a physical place, I mean, a physical building is concerned, I regard the city of Benares itself as a temple. And so I would probably have to say the city of Benares in general, because there, of course, are so many temples there. But otherwise, I perhaps would have to say it is the one of the first temples I went to when I moved to Poona, and it's outside Poona, several kilometers. It's one of the eight noteworthy Ganapati temples in Maharashtra. It's in a small village called Theur, Theur, and it's called the Chintamani Ganapati. Chintamani means the wish-fulfilling gem. So that's that probably, because it was the first and because it is still one that I very much appreciate. If I had to choose one, at least for today, that's the one I'd choose.
Mm-hmm. Well, thank you for sharing. Thank you. And so for anyone listening who would like to learn from you, I assume the best place to go is to your website, which is drsvoboda.com. Yes. But you can access a wealth of offerings online, certainly through Teachable at drsvoboda.teachable.com, I believe it was. And you're on Instagram at Dr. Robert Svoboda. So people obviously can reach out to you that way. And Just quickly, if I'm correct, you are retiring officially at the end of the year from public teaching, but will you be continuing the Satsanga subscription?
I will be continuing the Satsanga subscription for the at least for the next year, and we'll see what happens thereafter.
Okay.
But it's moving around from place to place to just to go and talk. It's, at this, now that I'm past 70, it's needlessly hard on my body.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just so much easier to teach online.
Certainly. Well, I can personally say myself that it's been incredibly valuable, the subscription, and a true gift for so many of us to have access to your knowledge and to enrich our lives in so many ways when we couldn't necessarily be with you in person. So in some sense, COVID's been a great blessing for that. So Robert, thank you so much for your time and particularly for your tireless dedication and sharing with the wider community. I know so many people listening just have deep reverence and appreciation for your work. And of course, thank you for joining me for this conversation on the podcast today.
Thank you.
If this episode was of value to you and your life, please subscribe. And if you can think of someone who would benefit from this dialogue, please do them a favor and send it their way. If you feel called, hop on over to iTunes and leave a 5-star review. This is the best way to get these conversations into the ears and hearts of our wider community, to those who need it most. You can find me at amyelandry.com or over on Instagram at amyelandry. May we all move a little closer to a life living in alignment.